Thank you for joining me today for the Philadelphia Police Department's HERstory event celebrating Women's History Month entitled Powered by Purpose. Today we have a powerful trailblazer joining us. Madam Loretta Lynch, she is the 83rd Attorney General of the United States. Appointed under President Barack Obama, Madam General served from 2015 to 2017, overseeing more than 100,000 employees across numerous agencies and offices, including 93 U.S. attorneys and major investigative agencies, including the FBI, the ATF, the U.S. Marshal's Office, and the DEA, amongst others. Her legal career has included both private law practice and public service, including three presidential appointments. Madam General has impressively put in the hard work and has risen through the ranks, serving as a chief assistant, chief, deputy chief, and an assistant U.S. attorney. Having returned to private practice, she is a partner in the Paul Weiss Litigation Department. She received her JD and her bachelor's in American Literature from Harvard University. And I want to say emphatically that this woman is a shero, and her contributions to law enforcement continues to be a motivating factor in my career. Please welcome Madam Attorney General Loretta Lynch. We're all clapping virtually. Thank you so much for being here with us today and taking so much out of your busy schedule. I want to go ahead and just jump right into some questions and get to the nitty-gritty. Is that okay?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Oftentimes we find that powerful women, particularly women of color, are in the midst of powerful movements. And, we're asked to wear many hats, and folks don't realize that we bring many different perspectives to the work that we're doing. And sometimes we're being asked to choose or pick sides when it doesn't work that way, when we're born with so many different qualities or traits. In my own experience, sometimes I find that we're put in these positions because folks need particularly difficult work done. How do you navigate through these climates? And what have your experiences been like, as you figure it out, or as you have been figuring it out throughout your professional career? What would you say to other women?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say, first of all, I want to echo my thanks in your having me here and share what a wonderful role model you are for women in law enforcement and women who are in positions of power where we have not always walked. So thank you for your leadership in this area. And you're right. So often women are placed in positions of power at the most difficult times. And you look around and you say, well, there must be something broke that needs fixing because here I am, right?
Right.
And the first thing I would say to women in leadership roles, whether it's law enforcement or the law in general or any other position, is know that you have everything that you need to get this done. Because usually before women are placed in the leadership role, we have very often been the backbone of these organizations. We have been the ones building teams, building consensus, building bridges. We've been the ones organizing. We've been the ones who essentially have been doing the behind the scenes work for some time. And then when the moment comes, and however it develops, however it happens, you find yourself in that leadership chair. It can be different, it can be lonely, it can be challenging, but actually, I find that women bring so much to the table, echoing what you said in framing this issue, because we often do know our organizations deeply, and we often know them at several different levels. And that's what it takes sometimes to really know how to change an organization, how to bring out the best in people, and how to really drive positive progress. And because often we're new to leadership, we're not really limited by the old mantras of what leadership is supposed to do or supposed to look like. And we've been told all our lives it doesn't look like us,
Right.
but here we are.
Right.
So already there's a difference. And so I think women need to embrace that difference. They need to embrace their knowledge. They need to own their leadership and understand that they have everything that they need and more to manage in these difficult situations. And we see this. you see it, I'm now, as you noted, back in a law firm. So I spent a lot of time interacting with different corporations and all. And it's been clear for some time, and studies have noted this, that when you take corporate America, and if you have women in the leadership ranks of organizations, and if you have the more women you have on your boards of directors, the better your company does in terms of increasing their bottom line. So there's actually results. There are proven metrics that show the benefits of female leadership. Having a different voice in the room, somebody who knows what it's like not to be heard, frankly, is usually better able to bring other people out and bring those voices out. And everyone's style is different, but there's been enough similarities, I think, in how women move up the ranks and what they bring to the table that often isn't valued, but is incredibly valuable.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'll go back to that in a minute, but I think it's so important, the point that you make about bringing your perspective, but also bringing your lived experiences and then having that inform your leadership style. I think that's extremely important because I find myself, whether it was intentional or not, doing certain things because I know or I knew what worked for me, as I came up through the ranks and in various departments, and being that one in the room, feeling like I had to repeat myself over and over.
Yep.
So now making it a point to ensure that voices are heard when I know something was said at the table and it was overlooked. So thank you for bringing that out. I want to shift gears a little teeny tiny bit and just talk about the things that shape who we are, whether it's our community or our family, again, our lived experiences. And and I think for both of our instances, our parents, our families, and our communities have really molded us into who we are and who we are today. Hearing your family story and knowing what you've done in New York, in our country and internationally, we just talked about how you just came back from Poland. I can't help but to think that at least part of what drove your career is a deep desire for social justice, which is much like me and my experiences. As Attorney General, you've tackled some difficult, very difficult civil rights cases, such as the Eric Gardner case and Abner Louima. You also served as special counsel to the prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. What drives you to take on these important and difficult issues? I mean, not even talking about the cases that you have currently, we won't even go there, right? But what drives you to take on the cases and what motivates you to remind you that you're walking in your purpose?
Sure, that's an excellent question, and I'm so glad you started it off with a focus on family, because I have to tell you that my family's the backbone of everything that I do. And they just mean the world to me. And for my family, it's more as if they also feel like this is just what you're supposed to do. And I'm so grateful to come from a background really of service. My dad, who'll be 90 years old next month, he's 89. He's a retired Baptist minister, but I think he was always a frustrated lawyer. But was always, helping someone fight for tenure, who had been denied tenure at the universities where we were growing up. He was always down at the city council, pushing for school integration. He was always, whenever someone needed help, he was always there. And, that's how he was brought up by his father, who was also a minister. When my dad was a young minister in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is where I was born, he was one of two ministers to open up their churches for the students and community leaders who were planning the sit-ins at A&T University, which were going on when I was very, very young, like around 2 years old. And I was too young to remember it, but my father took me and my older brother to those planning sessions, just because he wanted us to be around young people who were focused on trying to change a tremendously unjust system. We're talking about, Jim Crow still being in effect. My mother is no longer with us, but she's was a retired school teacher and librarian, and quiet, pleasant lady. But she decided in her 20s, one time she and my dad are driving through rural North Carolina. He's going to preach at some small church, and they had to stop to get gas, and she was going to use the facilities, and the attendant tries to send her to the colored restroom.
Mhm.
And it wasn't even the women's room, it's just color in those days. This is before I was even born. And she just decides that she's done. And she's like, you know what? I don't feel like fighting flies tonight. And she goes into the white woman's restroom. And she just said she had not thought about it, but she just decided she was done. And she never used a segregated restroom again. Now, of course, my father's sitting in the car wondering, is this the night that we die? You know, it was that difficult. But they would take these steps, and they said they just portrayed it as, look, you know, you there's just certain things you have to do. So I always thought that having the benefit of parents like that who pushed me to excel in terms of schooling and education and stood up for me when things were denied to me, you know, because they didn't want the little Black girl to be the high school valedictorian. They didn't want the little Black girl to be the one who got this special award, you know, but they were always in my corner. And so it's given me the sense that everyone deserves that kind of protection. You know, maybe not individually, but certainly as we look at it at our communities, particularly our challenged communities, our communities of color in particular, who don't have anybody often fighting for them or on their side, and the kids who are growing up not thinking that anybody's in their corner. And
Mhm.
so that's always been a strong motivating factor for me. And so, you know, when you're a young lawyer, you don't know where that's going to take you. You really don't. And I was fortunate enough to start out working at a law firm, but then end up becoming a federal prosecutor and seeing the impact that law enforcement can really have on communities above and beyond just the enforcement actions that we all work on. I know that you've seen this too. It's such an important part of your leadership, you know, the servant leadership that you have modeled since your days in California and now in Philadelphia. And seeing that small things can make such a difference in connecting with people. So when I've had these opportunities presented to me, it really hasn't been so much, you know, what's the next big thing I can do? It's just like, does this connect with me in a way that lets me spread opportunity and a sense of connection to other people? And when you do that, and I've always found, honestly, the things that I've been fortunate enough to do have given me so much more than I think I've given them. You know, I went to the tribunal in Rwanda and I was part of a group of lawyers. We were teaching trial advocacy to the prosecutors there. We made a number of trips back and forth. And then I was asked to do a witness tampering investigation. And there were a number of witnesses who had testified, and some of the genocidaires from the Rwandan massacre had been convicted. And for some reason, that witnesses were recanting their stories. They were changing their stories later on. And the judges were suspicious, and they thought that these witnesses had been paid off. And in fact, they had been. That was what my investigation focused on. But they ended up spending a lot of time talking to people who had survived hell on earth. You know, the genocide in 1994 was a personal genocide where neighbors were turned against neighbors, and people were literally killed with machetes and sticks and bricks. And so talking to people who had survived that, realizing the resilience of the human spirit, gave me so much, you know, as I moved back to New York and into my life. And I think made me again realize that, you know, we can't prevent these atrocities. You mentioned my recent trip to Poland. Yes, I was there recently talking with several refugees and just doing an assessment of that situation for a UN group. And it made me realize, I thought back to my time in Rwanda, and realized that, you know, we do some incredibly terrible things to each other as human beings. You know, we just do. You know, war is awful. Genocide is tragic. Europe has seen so much of that. Africa has seen so much of that. And so there is, for some reason, there is this dark side, you know, to the human soul. But there's also this tremendous light. And so to have had the ability to touch people who, with their own strength, exemplify that has really been a gift to me. It really has been something that has supported me when I've struggled with making difficult decisions and difficult choices. And I actually lean on their strength a lot as I move through all the different things that I've been fortunate enough to do.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I find myself doing the same. You know, when I immerse myself in neighborhoods or communities here, just in Philadelphia, and I see the resilience and
Yep.
the spirit of hope in these neighborhoods, it really revitalizes me and lets me know that I'm not finished yet. Uh,
Right.
and if they can continue, I'm not saying that every neighborhood is bad, but there's so many pockets here in Philadelphia where they're experiencing something,
Yes.
whatever it is. But there's still optimism, and I think that's what continues to motivate me and drive me and let me know that my work isn't finished. I want to ask a follow-up question to that though.
Sure.
Um, there's a lot that comes with being a first. We're both trailblazers. We're both kicking down doors, and it's because others have held the door open
Oh,
for us.
yeah.
And one of the reasons why I wanted to sit with you, and it was so important for me to speak with you, is because you're one of the people that kick down the doors for people like me and for me, very personally. And so when I keep saying thank you, it's not only because I'm appreciative, but it's just an honor and a privilege to spend this time with you today. But I found that being a first, whether it was here in the city of Philadelphia or being a first here in, or not here, but in Portland, Oregon, or even a first attaining firsts in my home department in Oakland, California, there's an expectation. And I found that there was an expectation for me to choose. And because we have so many identities, I tell people, yeah, I'm the first Black female police commissioner or police chief in the state of Oregon, but I was born a Black female and I
Yes.
happen to do this. And I found that there was an expectation of me to choose sides,
Yes.
especially when, and like you, strong commitment to social justice, didn't really realize that I was being veered in the direction of all things having to deal with social justice, but that's where I landed, right?
Yeah.
Whether through, my upbringing or my interactions through high school and then college and graduate school. But when we find ourselves talking about social justice, we're talking about inequities in the criminal justice system.
Yep.
Obviously, you can't leave race out of that. You can't leave gender out of that. You can't leave class out of that. And because we identify um, in so many of those realms or in those,
Yeah.
I don't like to use the term check the boxes because we're not checking boxes. This is who we are. But we identify in so many different areas. I found that there was an expectation for me to choose. So if we're having a conversation about law enforcement
Yeah.
specifically, and its impact or a disparate impact on Black and Brown communities, there's an expectation that I'm still not going to be supportive of law enforcement. And I'm speaking in general terms, right? I'm not saying across the board, but it was almost as if, I think of my past experiences that, oh, wow, we have her here. This is new. She's going to be the police chief for only Black people, or she's
Yep.
going to be the police chief for only women. And, not recognizing or acknowledging that, but I've been in law enforcement my entire adult career.
Yes.
So I wear many hats and I identify, with many groups. I don't have to choose. And I think, I can see people's brains working or the dissonance saying, well, how could she make this decision? Or how could she be in support of when it was something that might not have looked very good that we've done in law enforcement, but it was still legal and ultimately it was the right thing to do. Um, and now it's well, you're picking. The first time I
Yes.
was ever called a race traitor was in Portland, Oregon, to my face, right?
Mhm.
And I remember being out in the middle of a scene. There was civil unrest, and a woman was yelling at me, "What are little Black girls going to think?" Because
Yeah.
of the decision that I made that day, which was the right thing to do, but it appeared as though I was turning my back against my own. So again, that there was this expectation that I was supposed to choose. Have you
Yeah.
ever experienced anything like that? And if so, how have you worked through that? Have you felt the need, like, look, I don't have to explain myself. I've made it in life. Or do you take time to explain the why behind you taking certain actions? But either way, how have you
Yeah.
worked with that?
When you were describing that incident, I was nodding along because that's been my path as well. I think it's for women in law enforcement and particularly for Black women in law enforcement, it is very much an expectation that we're going to be on a side. And that's the biggest thing I think to break down. And certainly I've had people question what I've been doing. You know, I've had people, I remember when I was a young prosecutor, and you mentioned earlier on the Abner Louima case, I was one of the prosecutors on that case. We prosecuted New York City police officers for an incredibly brutal attack on Abner Louima. And I had friends who were, you know, personally good friends of mine say, well, I'm finally proud of what you're doing now. And, you know, I would have discussions with them about it. And I've always sort of, when I was younger, I would get into arguments about it. And then I realized, you know, I need to step back and figure out where is this coming from.
Mhm.
And so much of it, I think, is coming from a place where, you know, we do represent many different communities. You know, you and I individually have so many different groups within us. You know, it's that, like that phrase, when and where I enter, I bring, you know, my whole sisterhood with me. And when people have felt shut out for so long, and when they felt marginalized for so long, and you know, they are often teetering between hope and despair.
Yeah.
You know, the hope that you can make great change, the despair that maybe somebody will harm you. I've had people share that fear with me as well. I'm sure you've heard that too. And then just sort of the deep-seated cynicism of let's not get too optimistic because things might not change.
Right.
And so I sort of take those incidents as not so much even directed at me anymore, as much as it is people really just expressing a deep pain and a deep sense of mistrust in the system. And when people are coming from that place, there's often very little you can say in that moment that's going to convince them that their worldview is wrong.
Right.
And so if I'm engaging with them personally, what I will usually say is something like, look, you may not agree with anything that I've done, but I will leave you with this. My goal has always been the protection of everybody in this community. Everyone deserves to feel protected. And sometimes it's not going to look like that, and I understand it. All I ask is that you wait and see how things develop. But you're not really going to be able to really deal with the deep-seated trauma that has led to that expression. And certainly, you know, I've had that even in my private practice. It's like, you know, how can you do this? How can you do that? And my view has been, you know, particularly now that I'm in a position where I can actually influence my clients in positive ways. And I feel like I have an obligation to do that. And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work, but I have an obligation to try, even if someone may think, oh, it doesn't look like that at first. You know, there's usually a longer game to that. And again, people express their concern because they're coming from generations of disappointment, generations of trauma, and generations of seeing the cycle, you know, go up and then down. So I view it as that's what they're expressing. And you just have to keep on keeping on. And you'll touch them in some other way. And it may not be in that moment. It may not even be, you know, soon. It may take years for people to come around and understand. I've had that happen to me as well. You know, I've had people, I will tell you that when I was in my first iteration as U.S. Attorney, we were working intensely on trying to bring some needed reforms to the NYPD after the Louima case.
Mhm.
And because we were negotiating primarily with Rudy Giuliani, you can imagine how that was going. And I'm here to tell you that Rudy has not changed that much. And it was the end of the Clinton administration. And so we ended up running out of time before we could actually effectuate these changes. And I had people coming to me and saying, we're so disappointed in you. You know, we thought you were going to finally do this and you know, sort of implying motivations and things that weren't true. And my view was, you know, a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. I'm not one to throw, you know, my leadership under the bus. And so you said, look, I understand you're disappointed. I am too. And that's all you can say. And literally, Commissioner, years later, in a totally separate case, somehow through maybe a FOIA request, some documents got released from that time period when I was negotiating with the city. And there were some letters that showed, you know, some of the things I had been pushing for and working for that I had not talked about publicly because they were confidential. They were part of the discussion that we were having. And so we didn't get to achieve them, but the effort was clearly reflected in these documents. And someone actually wrote an article in the Village Voice saying, you know, here we thought that she had sort of laid down and not pushed, and now we see, in fact, she was pushing all along. Now,
Mhm.
you're not always going to get that kind of vindication. And frankly, the people who were mad at me in the beginning probably never even saw the second article. But again, we're not doing it for that. We're not doing it for everyone to like us or agree with everything that we do. That's not the nature of law enforcement. It's not the nature of hard jobs. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And ultimately, it will make someone's life better. Even the people who criticize you, even the people who ask you what a little Black girl is going to think, hopefully they'll think, here's a strong Black woman who isn't afraid to make tough decisions. That's what they'll think. Because that little Black girl is one day going to be in a position where she's got to make some tough decisions. And she needs to see people who have done that before and have said, doing the right thing is the important thing here. And keeping the well-being of the entire community in the forefront is the right thing here. And that will prevail. That will prevail.
I need to put that in a bottle. So every now and again, I just pop the top and listen to it every time I need to hear it. Thank you for that. You mentioned the work that you've done in the areas of reform with New York, but you've really done some pivotal work with police departments all over the country, including ways that the police and the community can work better together and examine use of force policies. I think of Chicago, for example. You also worked with Syracuse University's Department of Public Safety on improving their policies, particularly around communication and adhering to policies or SOPs for bias related incidents. I had the privilege of sitting in a meeting with other members of major city chiefs. It was a board meeting where we had the honor of speaking with policy advisors in the current White House administration. And I wanted to make the point, along with my colleagues, that it's important for us to talk about police reform and accountability. Very important. But it's not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely.
From standing up and supporting law enforcement. And I think we've seen over the last couple of years or so, when the narrative changes so dramatically, we've been dealing with a defund or an abolish narrative, it really does something to undermine the legitimacy and the credibility of law enforcement. And I think that's taken a toll, not just on our ability to, run efficiently through our budgets, right, our operating budgets, but also, it had an impact on morale, just in general, and our ability to recruit. With violent crime increasing in the way that it has been, do you see a nexus between the narrative that we've been experiencing over the last couple of years or so and crime going up? Or is there a way for us to message that we can have reform and accountability while working to address violent crime in a very constitutional way, right? And we have both at the same time.
Yeah. I think what you're describing is the challenge of policing today. And it has been a challenge really for some time. I was privileged enough to be meeting with some police chiefs about a year after, maybe about 2 years after Ferguson, and I was down in Dallas, and Police Chief Brown was retiring, and I was at his luncheon, and people were talking about the last couple of years in policing, and I remember he said, who would have ever thought? I was sitting there watching Ferguson like everybody else, and who would have ever thought that tiny Ferguson, Missouri, would come to represent the face of policing across this country? Who would have ever thought that? And so and because of the nature of law enforcement, the tremendous respect that it typically does garner and still does in some communities, but also the great power that it has, and the fact that it represents for so many people very often the only interface they really have with government. Most people don't spend time with the mayor. they don't hang out with the city council, but they see a police officer. They ask him questions, they interact with him, maybe it's positive, maybe it's negative, and they call the police into their homes. So the police on a regular basis are actually being brought into the community to do something.
Right.
And so, there's so much connection there. And there's so much of a burden, frankly, on the police. They really do represent all of government that in ways that go beyond their mandate, but it's there. It just is. And I just think that it's really important to recognize that for some people, as in many situations, trust is one of these things that is so easily broken. One incident, and we did a lot of work after Ferguson to focus on law enforcement organizations that had positive relationships with community groups, that had dragged them back literally from a Ferguson type shooting, a Baltimore type situation. They had put in the work, they had built the relationship. And then what happens in 2020? George Floyd, and with that incident, we're back to where we were even before Ferguson. And so I think it's important for law enforcement in particular to recognize that as much of the hard work that they do, there's always going to be this representational issue where one bad incident really can pull everybody down. And in those times, that's the time that you need to look around and realize that you've already built the community connections that will carry you through those difficult times. And I still think that can be done. I have tremendous faith in people. I think law enforcement in particular is such a group of different disparate people who come together with a single mission. That's an amazing thing, Commissioner, to see that. I know you see it every day when you look at your force, but to see them united under one mission. And then you look at the communities that are really in pain. And I think it's incumbent upon law enforcement sometimes to step a little bit out of themselves and say, you know what, we are being challenged. We are being criticized. We are, in many instances, I tell you, one of the most painful times I had as Attorney General was the number of police officer shootings that we had to deal with. They're at times when they're being cut down.
Right.
And holding on to that and managing that and dealing with that trauma, but also recognizing that the trauma of the communities that are expressing really some very negative sentiments is just as deep. It's just as deep. And sometimes I feel very often that the police and community are saying the same thing, just using different language and basing it on different instances, but everybody is saying, see me, look at me and look at what's in my heart, and don't judge me and my cohorts by the actions of one person over there or somebody over there. Judge me by what I bring to you, and so don't look at the uniform that I wear. Look at my face. Don't look at my baggy pants or whatever the kids are wearing nowadays. Look at my face and see me. And they're both saying the same things. I found, when I was traveling and talking to the different groups, this desire to be recognized and respected and uplifted. So the challenge to me has always been, how do you connect those two? How do you make people find those points of commonality at times of great trauma and great pain? And I have always thought that you have to start before the tragic shooting, whether it's of the unarmed Black man or of the police officer. You've got to start before that. And you've got to build those connections so that when that tension does come to the fore, and look, there's an inherent tension in policing and the community just because of the nature of it.
Right.
But when those difficult situations arise, you've got a base at least of communication so you can talk about it. And what I found when I looked at the communities that had come back from these tragic situations, because I traveled, I went to like 12, 15 different places to talk just to police officers and communities. And some of them were struggling and some of them had come out of difficult times. And they weren't perfect. Like this is not a perfect world. Yeah. But the ones that had built something were the ones that had sat down and acknowledged the pain on both sides and had acknowledged that neither side always brought their best to the fore when they had interactions, and realized that they both had work to do, but they also had work to do together on the larger community. And whether that is trying to reach people earlier so that before the kid has the interaction with the police, he knows who they are and what they do and what his rights are, that before the officer goes to a home that's these domestic violence calls, the most volatile, the most dangerous. You're walking into a situation, you're walking into the worst day of someone's life. So before an officer goes into that situation, do they have what they need to take care of themselves? You know, have they been given the tools to manage the trauma of what officers see on a daily basis? So it's not mutually exclusive. And what I have found is that with so many other things, people will tell you, oh no, you have to pick. Oh no, you have to choose. Oh no, you're limited. And the best advice I ever got was advice my mother gave me years ago in a similar situation. I think I was at school and somebody was saying to me, oh, you know, Black girls don't do that. You know, you're never going to succeed in there. And I was upset. And I was probably crying to her. And she said, you know, people are always going to look at you and they're going to try and define you. They're going to try and tell you who you are and what you can and cannot do. Don't ever let them. You tell your own story. You define yourself and you chart your own path. And so there's always going to be people out there saying, oh, commissioner, you're talking to, you're on the cops side, or commissioner, oh no, you know, you're on the women's side. And, you know, all I can say is to you and all the other strong women in law enforcement, we have some strong women. We have some awesome women in law enforcement. They are going to save us all. I'm convinced. is you define yourself. You define yourself and just be clear. I don't have to choose. I don't have to choose because we all want the same thing. We want everybody to go home safe at night and we want everybody to feel protected. And there's many, many ways to get there and you'll cover them all. But I hear you. I hear you on that. But as I said, when we get to this position, it's because we have done so much work in the background. You know, we know how to get things done. We know how to build those bridges. We know how to make those connections. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean people aren't going to, you know, try and diminish us. The more people try and diminish you, the more power you are showing to them.
Really quick, lightning round. I'm going to ask you just a handful of questions.
Sure.
All right. First one. What ideals or beliefs do you want our younger generation to have as you pass the torch?
I'd like them to focus on how they can help somebody else. I've always found that, you know, young people have so many challenges today, economic, social, all these things. But whenever you are struggling, the one thing that's guaranteed to make you feel better is to reach out and help someone else. So I want every young person to find some way to do that in their life.
Excellent. Do you have a mentor?
I've had several mentors in my time. I've been very fortunate. And some of them have been men, some of them have been women.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a young lawyer at my very, very first law firm, I was actually fortunate enough, they had a formal mentor program and I was assigned a junior partner and we became great friends. He's now a federal judge and he mentored me through that time period. When I was in the U.S. Attorney's office, I had a number of mentors who promoted me and supported me. And then the U.S. Attorney right before me, Zach Carter, first African-American U.S. Attorney in Brooklyn, he mentored me and has been one of my biggest cheerleaders, like a big brother to me. So I've had mentors at different points in my career.
Okay. How do you, or is this even possible? How do you balance career, your personal life, and your passions?
You know, that's the struggle for all women everywhere. And I've come to the conclusion that you balance it by essentially having a focus on each at different points in time. But everybody struggles with that, you know, trying to still be, you know, a good, you know, wife, daughter, sister, mom, and as well as a good lawyer, prosecutor, or police officer is a challenge. It's a challenge. But when you're with whatever of those roles you are, you give it your all and you try and bring your best to it. And you try and make sure that when the real issues come up, that you know your family knows you're always in their corner and they have your back. But I'm not sure you can have it all at once. I think you can have it all at different points in time.
That's a good answer. Thank you. As a leader, how do you stay mindful of who's at the table and who's missing?
What I always find as a leader is I come to my best conclusions when I hear all the different points of view. So I remember the times when I was not yet the leader, but I had something to say and felt either like I couldn't say it or I wouldn't be heard, or what all women have been through, you express a point of view, no one notices it, and then 2 minutes later, a man picks it up and echoes it, and all of a sudden it's the greatest idea
Right.
anybody's ever heard.
Right.
So I remember those days vividly. And so I've always made a point before I make an important decision, when I have a team that's working with me, is I don't give my point of view first because I want to hear from them. And if I haven't heard from somebody, I go around the room and I will say, I know that this is important to you. I know that you've got some thoughts here. Tell me your views on something. And I'll draw people out before I come to that final conclusion. And you have to be mindful of it. You really have to it has to be a deliberate choice to hear from all the voices in the room. And I've tried to do that throughout my career.
Okay, two more.
Sure.
What's been the biggest barrier you've had to overcome in your life, whether it's personally or professionally, and how did you overcome it?
I would say the biggest barrier, and I don't think I'm alone in this, I think it's been having been underestimated. The perception that if you're a woman, you can't be a strong prosecutor. If you're a woman, you can't be a strong advocate. The perception that when I was a young lawyer, when I was a young prosecutor, I started out as a narcotics prosecutor, then I moved into violent crime. And just this perception that, are you tough enough for this? And I would think to myself, do you know what being a woman is like?
Right.
What do you think? What do you think my world is like?
Right.
And so that sense of always being underestimated. Then I began to realize that was actually a power. That was actually something that I could use to my advantage. So I learned to love it when I was underestimated, particularly in court. But I would say that's the constant thing that I think women have to face throughout their career, and mine was no different.
I can definitely relate to that. Lastly, what's on your playlist? What are
Oh,
you listening to nowadays?
so I am definitely old school. Old school. So my playlist will always have some Earth, Wind, and Fire on
Okay.
it. Always have some Earth, Wind, and Fire. And lately I have even pulled in some Sam Cooke, which predates me even, but I just love the voice. And then Sunday mornings, I will pull up the gospel. I will. I'll pull up some gospel and do some virtual church. And then I will pull up some soft jazz type things and maybe even a little Motown. But I tend to go old school.
Amen. Corner over here. Look, I think thank you for that. I think we've run out of time. I have at least 12 more questions that I wanted to ask you, but I just wanted to thank you for your time this afternoon. Really, really, really quick, lightning answer.
Okay.
What would you tell your 22-year-old self? Not 21, 22. Real quick.
Ooh, 22-year-old self, I would say, trust yourself. Don't let what other people say about you define you. And I would say, everything is going to be fine. You may not know it now. Everything is going to be fine.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I'm looking forward to getting this out to the masses. And again, you are amazing. Please keep doing what you're doing. You inspire so many of us to keep going and walking in our purposes as well. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today.
Oh, it's been just a joy.
Thank
Just
you.
a joy. And I'm so happy you are where you are.
Thank you. I'm gonna be here until something or somebody tells me to stop.
There you go.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.